Greetings and welcome all. Chief Yuya here, and expanding on our latest podcast, Good is Evil. And I just wanted to not only welcome you, but add a little bit more detail and a little bit more insight to what was mentioned there. I'm going to fatten it up a little bit. And of course, there were some things mentioned in that particular podcast that I won't be covering here, right? So I guess, they can balance each other, if you will, right? But in any event, I was speaking about the idea of dualism and kind of having a mindset where you're looking at good and evil as opposing forces that you have to choose. And I also am adding on to an IG post that I put up today, dealing with the Trinity of thinking as opposed to the dualistic state of thinking. All right. So you can get some more information there too, because in that I also hit upon string theory and how string theory seeks to compress, or to not necessarily compress, but to account for our 10-dimensional experience within one string, one vibrating string that would vibrate at different curvatures, right? As opposed to particle theory, which is, it's more of a 0-point dimensional particle theory and added on to by other energies. This one is string theory is a bit more holistic, but it's a theory like anything else, so it's being worked out, not yet proven. But nonetheless, I used some of that reasoning and that thought to scribe an Instagram post today, and yesterday's segment also covered that a bit too. So to get into it quickly, one of the things that I wanted people to be careful about in interpreting things, we're looking at the mind, and I think this is a great opportunity to look at the stability of the mind, right? And how the mind can become unstable, right? I don't mean to laugh, but I think some of you know why I'm laughing. But so in any event, one of the things that I had pressed on was just one of the ideas that was brought about through like The Last Samurai, that particular movie, where there was a character who was telling Ogren, he had too many minds, or too many mind, basically. And essentially what that meant was that, there was a particular scene where Aldrin was sparring. And during that sparring session, like his demons were coming up. He was all over the place, so so it was like, it was a young guy, Nobutada. He comes up and he says, "Please forgive, too many mine." And Aldrin is like, like, too many mine. Like, what are you talking about? And Aldrin is played by Tom Cruise. And then Nobutada says, "Hi, mind the sword, mind the people, watch, mind the enemy, too many mine, no mine," right? And to me, that was like the most worthwhile scene in the entire film, especially when he said, "Mind the people, watch," because I recall back to someone I used to train with many years ago, and we would always spar and train in the park. And one of the things that he enjoyed doing was putting you in a position where you had to fight in front of people. And, especially if you're fighting someone who's more advanced than you, who you pretty much know they're going to beat you. It's not about you. I mean, you fight in the win, but they're just far more skilled than you are. And there might be people outside, because usually when, you get a couple of guys in the park fighting and punching on each other and kicking each other around, people watch. And, there could be a woman watching that you're attracted to, or a bunch of guys. They could be cracking jokes and all those different things. And while you're getting flipped in the air and kicked across over park benches and things like that, and there's blood, coming down the side of your lip, and, your face is looking swollen and you're sweating and all of those different things, right? And you're concerned about all of those things. And that divides and pulls and wrenches the mind in too many directions. So that was kind of like an example of that. So that, like, you mind the people, watch, people watching you, concerned about that. So that was just like an entrance to what we're speaking about again with the dualism. And a lot of times when we get caught up, so I was using the energy of Haru and Set as a prime example of that, because again, a lot of times when we look at the battles of Haru or Horus to some of you, and Seth, we look at it from one perspective. One person wanted to restore Ma'at, and the other person wanted to establish disorder. So if we are beating from a source that is primarily in alignment with what we consider to be the righteous deities, of course, the majority would side with Haru or Horus and say, well, that's where we kind of need to be, because we shouldn't be trying to wage disorder or to establish disorder in any shape, form, or fashion, right? And that within itself is a trap. That's a trapping in where it's got to be this or it has to be that, right? I'm poor or I'm rich. I love money or I don't like to deal with money. This one's right, that one's wrong. This is left or this is right. And what happens is that it kind of forces you into these far extremities where you can never take on the value of the other side, quote unquote, if you will. So again, when we're looking at the energy of Set and we're looking at the energy of Haru, there's this idea there that this is constant contending that goes on between the two of them. And, we're looking for Haru to be victorious at some point. And of course he is. But at the same time, we have to get out of looking at it as like a cartoon or like we're watching a movie. That's a part of our development. So when we are functioning from a more immature space, a more immature mind, then we're functioning from a mind of dualism. So we're functioning from the yes, we're functioning from the no, we're functioning from the right, we're functioning from the wrong. We're functioning from the yin, or it has to be the yang, or it has to be the light, or it has to be the dark, so forth and so on. I think you get the idea of that. And that is a immature, undeveloped way of seeing the world, because we haven't really forged a relationship beyond the dualism, and we don't understand that there are energy entities that are to be viewed, controlled remotely, right? And you cannot do that until you've established an inner agency of balance within yourself, where you're not kicked to the left or kicked to the right. And the truth is, the reason that happens, the reason that you get caught up in that is because of your ego. So your ego, it can do what it wants to do when you're stuck in 1 to 2 mind, left mind, right mind. So for instance, if I say I know something, I'm thinking about it, I know it. I either have to know it intellectually or I have to know it emotionally. So the ego will push to either side. Okay, did you experience it? Did you feel it? Or did you just read about it? And see, a lot of times we push to one. And unfortunately, in this society, if someone has an intellectual knowing in that they've read about it, they watched a video, they listened to a podcast, they went to a lecture, for them, they have now grasped knowledge without understanding that there are levels to knowledge, just like there's levels to evil, there's levels to good. There's not an absolute yes and no of it all. So if I come into the knowledge of flying a plane, and then I now go broadcast that I can fly planes, but yet and still I've never actually had the experience of flying the plane, that's only the ego that seeks to keep me in that place of non-doing. Because from the moment I do, I have to humble myself to either being able to do it correctly or failing, and taking that, asking that question before I even begin, and saying, can I validate what I know? And I may not be able to validate what I know, right? But I don't know until I do it. Just like if I go into the park to spar, I don't know if today I'm going to go back home with a busted lip, or if today I'm going to walk away and be happy because finally this person who's been teaching me for so long, I busted his lip. Who knows, right? So the ego will say, well, you know how to punch, you know how to kick, you know how to block. What else you need to do? You know what? You need to not treat your body so roughly. You don't need to be out there sparring and stuff. Is bad for your spine. It's bad for your neck. You're going to be walking around punch drunk and yada, yada, yada. You can't go to work with a black eye, or with a busted lip, or, with a crooked nose. So, right. So the ego seeks to kind of trap us into the lore of one aspect. So if we're feeling something and we don't know it, or if we've experienced it, and someone comes and begins to teach us or attempts to teach us, the ego says we don't need to know that, right? We've already experienced it. We've already felt it. So you can't tell me nothing about it because I've already experienced that. I've already been through that. And again, that form of kind of blinding or self-imposed blinding is another extreme form of ego, where I only want to experience, but I don't want to really have the knowledge of what it is or the knowing of what it is that I'm experiencing. So there's never a coming together, and when you look at, again, in the moments when, or when the time period, when you see that collaboration between Haru and Set, or Horus and Seth, you see now they're working together to unify Upper and Lower Kingdom, or Upper and Lower Egypt, right? So there's an idea there that there comes a point where there has to be a middle point focus and a middle point expansion beyond this one and that one. It's almost like a marriage. Within a family, you may have two members. You have a man, you have a woman. And then when there's an expansion of a third, which could be a child, now you have established a Holy Trinity. And eventually through that, the establishment of the Holy Trinity between mother, father, and child, and the development of consciousness, or the expansion and the power of that own genius, then it becomes like a blur eventually. Very similar to when man and woman come together and they have intercourse. There's a moment where it's very difficult to separate one body from another. You see, so there's a dissolution of things. So what that ultimately means is that when you're moving beyond your dualistic thinking of left brain, right brain, and you're moving more into your triplicity of thinking, the next step after that is there's no mind in the way at all, right? So your thinking becomes pure. It doesn't become reactionary. It doesn't become filled with the energy entities, if you will, but rather is completely controlled, and you're able to cease any kind of ego triggering. You just, and that's a very powerful thing. It's not an immediate kind of thing. I know. I always have to say that. I know. And the reason I have to say that, so just so you know, you always hear me say, now, before you say that, you always hear me say that when I'm doing segments. I know you're probably tired of hearing it, but that's because people are so egotistical. So as soon as I say something, they'll say, yeah, that's me. That's not you. Because if it were you, you wouldn't say anything. You'd just be doing it. You see? Or like they say, well, you already pretty much telling me everything I already knew. Then you wouldn't be hearing it right now if you already knew it. And why would you sit here and listen to something you already know? But I don't go through all those questions because it's a total waste of time. And I don't like to hear a lot of egoic rambling. It's irritating, to be honest with you. So I just say, oh, okay, cool. But the thing is, it's that because you heard something doesn't mean you know it. Because there are levels to knowing, right? Because you felt something doesn't mean you know it, because there are levels to knowing. So just because you may have the Haru aspect of heaven or that which is above or that light, it doesn't mean that you actually understand the full makeup of the individual when Set is attached to Haru. So when you understand, you may say, I understand Haru, but that's like saying, I understand your face, but I don't understand your behind. Well, did you ever walk behind the person to look at their behind? No, I don't deal with that. I only deal with the face. You know, I remember hearing a woman say that to me once when she was speaking about how men should not look at women's bodies to determine how they look, but they should look at the face. And I said, but the face, either way, you're still looking at something physical. So they may have a face that's not very appealing, but their body is appealing. So shouldn't that count? Shouldn't that go towards the credits of their physical attractiveness? And of course, she didn't necessarily have a body that was appealing, or a face, really. So I don't think, she shouldn't have been saying anything. But nonetheless, that was her complaint, But the point is that there's a holistic agency that we invoke when we're looking to understand what something is. And once we see that there's something that's attached, we need to look at all parts of it. Of course, we begin with what's light because that's how we know where to enter at. So one of the examples, so we'll begin from heaven because that's where the fall is, and we'll fall down into material. No different than us falling into our physical body, falling from light into the melanin of darkness, or the darkness of melanin, right? So we begin with the light. We begin to try to get an intellectual and intelligent grasp on how light moves itself throughout the cosmos and deposits itself through its own sacred and divine course into this materializing of a certain objective. That's perfectly fine, right? But then one of the other aspects that I brought up in that segment was the understanding of the clip off, or again, the backside of the tree, right? And of course, when I'm talking about the tree, I'm talking about the tree of life. So we're going to a multi-dimensional perspective of how we view our own brain. And let me just say, I'm bringing these things up because it's important to understand, like, there's so many things going on in the world right now, and many people are looking to establish their answers in absolutism. These people are wrong. These people are right? Or this situation is wrong. This situation is right. It should be like this, or it should be like that. And see, these are all functions of the ego. So as opposed to looking for the simplicity and the immature mind of right and wrong, we should really be looking, or I would advise that you look for the value of harmony, which is much more difficult, right? So how do these forces harmonize together? How is harmony disrupted? You see, so one of the examples that I had given, I had put a picture of me playing the guitar a long time ago. And I spoke about the interplay between my left and right hands and how that's harmonized by the awareness and understanding of my first eye, right? So that becomes the triplicity of the musician. I have my left hand doing one thing, my right hand is doing another thing, and then my pineal gland or pineal organ, or my first eye, some would say your brow chakra, right? That's also orchestrating and conducting what's happening. So now we have 3 different intelligences working at once, and they all have a different role and a different ritualistic understanding of what's happening at that time. They all are functioning on their own different proportion of mechanics, right? So with that, right, if I do that long enough, I'll be playing without thinking, without feeling, without knowing. It will just be a flow. In music, we call that being in the pocket, where you're not thinking at all. You're just a vessel, right? You're just being a vessel, right? So the mind has been moved out of the way. So even if a mistake is made, you don't even feel it. Sometimes you don't even realize it till you go back and listen to a recording, because you're not functioning through the life of the ego or the death of the ego, right? Okay, so that was one of the things that I was speaking about. Like I said, it's important in this time period because, again, there's so much addressing of what is evil versus what is non-evil. and really no sense of, are these energies that are supposed to kind of cooperate together, if you will, right? So I had spoke about in the podcast, I won't go through all of it, but just like, you have different proportions and different states of that actual tree of life that, many of us know the story, even in the Garden of Eden, and Adam, or red earth, and Eve going to that tree and getting some food, taking a bite, if you will. And we know, again, from a simplistic perspective, when you're looking at, you have the clip off, which is the back end of that tree. Sometimes they call that, like, you have the tree of life, and then they call that back end the tree of death. I mean, obviously it's the opposite. They call it Echtium. Echtium is the tree of death. But that's considered to be the occultish aspect of the tree of life. So sometimes people will see the tree of life and think that that's now you playing with the occult. That's not the occult. Like, that's not the spooky stuff, quote unquote, if you will. It's the tree of death that now goes into the hidden, which is what occult is, the hidden aspect. And that doesn't mean that it's Luciferian, if you will. In fact, the tree of life would be Luciferian, in all honesty. But, it doesn't mean that it's something that's wicked, that's taking you away from the wisdom of Yah, because all of these things are the wisdom of Yah. It goes deeper. And that's, again, a lot of times when we're looking at things dualistically, we can't process and understand beyond a dualistic, immature mindset. So somebody will say something and we think we understand it, but we are infested with misunderstanding because of the mind that we're using to take in what was just said. You see, so for instance, if I'm functioning from a mindset where money is everything and I'm stuck in that space, and then someone starts to speak to me, the only thing I'm going to process everything through is money is everything. I don't have time for this or this or that, because I'm stuck in that space. But then if I'm stuck in a space where on the other side, I feel like through some form of righteousness, I've renunciated money, then now I'm listening for. So when someone starts speaking about something from a material perspective or just anything, I'm processing everything through what I'm unable to attract and achieve in my life, because I've renounced. If I've renounced materialism, then now it runs away from me. It's like chasing a dog out of your yard, and then wondering why, animals now, they run from you, nothing wants you to pet it or anything like that, because you've renounced it. So when you hear people say things like, I don't like to deal with money, I don't like to deal with money. And most of the time it's because they're uneducated about money. They don't have any kind of financial literacy. So that's why they don't like to deal with money. But nonetheless, that now creates a paradigm of things running from them, right? And the ego is very happy with all of this. You're making the ego extremely pleased, because it doesn't have to adopt any new positions. And the immature, undeveloped, dualistic mind, it's like, it's just very simple. And a simple mind is a very easy mind to control. But when you start moving beyond the dualism, the ego has a little bit of trouble when it's not just this or that, because this or that allows me to concrete myself in a stance against something else, right? So if I look at the Kabbalistic tree of life and I say, okay, well, let's look at the clip off, the back end, let's look at the tree of death. Of course, there are triggers where people will say, oh, man, leave that stuff alone. Leave it alone. Okay, well, regardless of the side of the tree that you're on, you have what's called the At. And sometimes the At is also given the name Belial, right? But you have the At. And the At is pretty much the same thing on both sides. So if I'm functioning from the tree of death or the tree of evil, I have to utilize the At, which is typically translated as knowledge, to get to the tree of life. If I'm functioning from the tree of life and I want to get to the back end, I have to use the At. That's the gateway. So knowledge becomes the gateway to get to either side, it will say, either component or aspect of that particular tree. Right now, on the clip off side, Oftentimes the At is not translated as knowledge, but as Belial, which means that which is worthless or that which is meaningless. So if you think about when a person is trapped in the death of their own aggressive ignorance and you present knowledge to them, most of the time they'll tell you, I have no use for that. That doesn't pay my bills. You see, that's not going to put food on my table, so forth and so on. Or like, I know when I'm doing sessions with people and I start breaking things down, I can feel the frustration. I can feel the resistance. And in the breath, well, they start making that noise. Okay. All right. I understand what you're saying. Okay. I get all of that. But what do I do next? What am I supposed to do? You see, they're stuck in that. What you're supposed to do is grab onto this knowledge and jump through this Sephiroth so you can get out of that death cycle that you're in. But what the ego will tell them is he doesn't understand you. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Then they'll say things like, okay, well, let me word it this way. Let me reword it. So because I don't think I'm being understood. And then that's when I usually kind of go a little quiet. I say, okay, all right, let's hear it. But it's because they're living on that backside of the tree where they don't recognize knowledge as the gateway. They're being tricked into believing that it's irrelevant, right? So it's just like if you speak to certain people in certain religions and you say, hey, what color was your prophet? Or what color was your Messiah? Oh, it doesn't matter. Well, if it doesn't matter, then, why have you made such an effort to make them this particular race? If it doesn't matter. Oh, it doesn't matter. Just leave that alone. You see? So knowledge becomes meaningless on the backside of that particular tree. So you can kind of see the duality of everything. There's a duality depending on the perspective. There's a duality that the author knowledge can be a pathway and it could be a precious pathway, or at the same time, it could be when we are exploring knowledge for the wrong reasons, it becomes useless secret information, right? Now, we have a lot of that in the culture community where all we want to talk about is stuff that doesn't matter. Let's just, stuff doesn't matter right now. And I don't want to disrespect anybody by bringing up any topics because I know some people have really devoted their lives to it. So I'm not going to make a list now of the stuff that is kind of a distraction. That's for more private, Anu ministry phone calls and when we do the Sabbath meetings and stuff. But publicly, you figure out, what it is that I may be referring to, or what has manifested itself in your world. You might, But anyway, so again, you have these different concepts that are ever present that have this sense of duality, whether it's Haru and Set, and light and darkness, and having this confusion, not understanding that when we look at the story of Haru and Set, yes, it does signify what was happening on the land at that time, but time is moving in a spiral. So Haru and Set are still active inside of you. That battle is still happening through your creation. So you being stuck, because Set is the archetype over materialism, which again, let me put my thing on mute. So Set being that archetype over materialism, there is a time when you're coming up through that root chakra. So that's all you really know. That's all you really care about. And sometimes, unfortunately, people will get stuck. They may go beyond the root chakra, or they don't realize that there are levels to red. There are levels to the root chakra. And the ego will keep you right there thinking that you're expanding, but there's no real expanding. And that was the science of that last samurai piece when he was like, yo, too many mind, no mind, right? Because when you're expanding beyond it, now you're beyond positioning of chakras. You're beyond even Sephiroth. Well, I'm over here. I'm over here in Chokma. I'm over here in Chesed. I'm over here in Tiferet. I'm over here in Gardab. I'm over here in Samael. I'm over here in Gamaliel. I'm over here in Yesod. And sometimes we glorify. Yeah, I'm in Lilith. Lilith is the complement to Malkuth. So sometimes we glorify the fact that we're stuck, in those positions, and sometimes that's the glorification of an Orisha. So silly, so very silly. And again, it's a dualistic mind. If you want to grow spiritually, you got to grow mentally. Period. You can't be a mental. Trying to say something politically correct. So let's just say you can't be mentally tiny. I'll just say that. And expect to have all this great spiritual wisdom. It doesn't work that way. So often that's why you hear me say things like when I'm doing spiritual work or readings for people, 15% of it is a divination. Every 85% is psychology. I already know what your problem is. And 90% of the time, I don't even have to do a casting for it, because my mind has expanded to that point. I see your problem already. Now, 85% of my effort is trying to get it through your thick skull. That's 85%. If you would just say, okay, and then do, every divination session would be about 8 minutes, as opposed to an hour. Sometimes I'm with people 3 hours. That's 2 hours and 50 minutes of psychology, because you're not listening. Because you won't receive, because you're stuck on one side of the tree, or you're stuck on one side of the mind. And I'm trying to rope you through the consciousness of each side, and then rope you up to the third point, and then get rid of both of them, dissolve the whole mind together. And sometimes that takes a lot of work if a person hasn't been doing that work on themselves, and they're stuck inside of this gap of ignorance. Then it becomes extremely difficult. That's why, like, when you hear people jump up and claim, yeah, I'm doing that, I'm there. They're not. Trust me, they're not. Anybody who's there doesn't do that. They know the work and the effort that it takes to be there. And those are just boisterous statements. Those are people who came into contact with something and believe that they understand what it is because they've come into contact with it, which is not the same. It's not the same as experience it. Or those are people who've experienced something that have no intellectual knowledge of it. Even with just those two, you still don't have an understanding. You still don't know, because you haven't now began to process from the third point. You see? And then after you process from the third point, and now you're functioning like you're supposed to, because like I said in my Instagram post, we're in the land of thirds. Third rock from Ra. We deal with trinities. Three is the magic number on the planet Earth. That's why everything we deal with comes in threes: knowledge, wisdom, understanding, omnipotency, omnipresence, omniscience. Everything is threes: mind, body, spirit. So why would you think that your brain all of a sudden is two? you see, one of the most important parts of you now all of a sudden is just two. Just like I said in the post, when you're using your left and right hand, they're not independent from your trunk or from your brain. So there's still a triplicity there of action, and there's a borderline that's crossed constantly in order to get those two things working together, or even one thing working together. There's a borderline there, So it's important to understand that yes, there is polarity between Haru and Set. There is polarity between Yahweh and the devil, or Shaitan, which is really a better compliment. There is complementary between the pillar of severity and the pillar of mercy on the Kabbalistic tree. There is complementary energies everywhere. Because in between, like on the tree of life, that front side, you have the pillar of mercy on the right, which is the masculine. You have the pillar of severity on the left, which is the feminine, and then you have the pillar of mildness in the middle, right? So there's middle points, but we're still just talking about a tree. We haven't even gotten to the good stuff yet. And then when you're talking about the dark side, the tree of evil, or the clip-off, you have the pillar of coercion, which is on the right. You have the pillar of compulsion, which is on the left. And then you have the pillar of condemnation, which is in the middle, right? So most things, when you start to really get to the deeper understanding of things, you're going to find that there's a triplicity that sits around everything. And it's the ego that wants you to get you out of triplicity. So that way you're always battling with, I'm battling my lower nature. I'm battling my upper nature. You know, even when you think about racism, it's really deep. And it's silly at the same time. This has always been my take. So we primarily focus on black versus white. Just so stupid, because there is no black, there is no white. So when you do that, you're now focusing on the fantasy. Like we say things like Black Lives Matter. Oh, I don't want to get too off, but that's a joke. That's a whole nother kind of joke within itself. But I think some people are now waking up to what the agenda is there. And that agenda has been very clear, but some people they like to feel things. So when somebody holds up a sign and they got a mask on and they're like, that's right, Black Lives Matter. Do the knowledge. Do the knowledge on that organization. And let's see if you still as hyped up. You know, well, maybe you will be. Who knows? You know, but I don't like anybody playing me for a fool. I can't get hyped over anyone who insults my intelligence, me personally, but everybody's different. You might not have a problem with it. But so anyway, when you do the knowledge and move beyond the emotionalism, then certain things become a bit more clear. And that's for anything, right? So again, that triplicity is always present. But like I was saying with race, so it's black versus white, but there's no black and there's no white, right? And then in that gambit of black versus white, what about the other people? What about Arabs? What about Asians? What about the Latino? Like, so they're neutral. They're completely out of it. You've never experienced any forms of discrimination or any kind of tension or problems with any of those other groups, right? Because you're stuck in dualism. So you forget. I'm not here to cause too much trouble, but I know I've personally been dealt some severe discrimination or just levels of prejudice by all of those groups mentioned. You see, I've gone head to head with every one of those groups mentioned, and then I've had some very peaceful experiences with all of those groups mentioned. Right? So again, when you're stuck in that dualism, you miss the point. You know, and one of the examples like I was explaining, you know, like you have Malkuth, right? Let's say, I'm just using that as an example. Malkuth on the tree of life is the kingdom. But on the other side, you have Nehemoth, or sometimes we say Lilith, which is materialism. So you have the kingdom of Yah versus the kingdom of materialism. So the kingdom of Yah says, I can't live on earth without a body. Whereas the kingdom of evil says, without a body, I can't live. You know, so there's always this like dualism. You know, the kingdom of Yah says, it's impossible for me to exist in life without a spirit. And the kingdom of evil says, the existence of a spirit is impossible. You see? So there's always this like push and pull, and you might get caught in either one. And when either way, you're on the wrong part of it all. When you're stuck in either dualism, you're on the wrong part of it all, right? So now you're asking, does that come down to what's going on in the streets now and the protesting? Yeah, absolutely. Because you've lost perspective. Some of you're not able to see clearly when you're still seeing with the mind of your history, when you're still seeing with your egoic mind, which is, of course, what the ego would like you to do. So within your egoic mind, there has to be a right and there has to be a wrong. There can't be certain things that are happening as a result of disharmony or certain things that are happening as a result of harmony. You're not looking at it from that perspective. So you'll always stay trapped and never really able to achieve your fullest expansion. Which your fullest expansion is when you go beyond the Trinity mindset, when you go beyond the triplicity mindset, when you go beyond, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, or omnipotency and omnipresence and, omniscience, or you go beyond mother, father, child. There's a gaseous explosion of expansion even beyond that, right? But you'll never get it as long as somebody has to win and someone has to lose. Someone has to be right. Someone has to be wrong. Someone has to be good. Someone has to be evil. And I have to choose and pick which side that I'm going to be on based on the calculations and the understanding that I'm going to develop with the mind that I'm at. That's just not going to work. It doesn't work. It never has worked, So again, you just think about, like I said, what the tree represents, what Haru and Set represent in our world and in our own development. And then you just have to start doing the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding and then move beyond that. And it's not a 1-2 process. I mean, that'd be great if it could be, but it's just not. When you're gaining wisdom, which is chokma, chokma on that, on a tree, and then you have Gogiel. Gogiel is the dark side, right? And Gogiel is like to be stupid. It's stupid, right? So if you think about it, whether you're dealing with wisdom or stupidity, they both have knowledge. Because being stupid is to know something, but still not conduct yourself accordingly to what you know. Being wise, is to use that knowledge in order to fashion your conduct and your governance based on what you know, right? So they both have actual knowledge, excuse me. They both sit next to Da'at, but it's how they choose to use it. So one of the Hebrew terms also for the clip-off aspect of Gagiel is the one who hinders, right? So, you think about that, the idea of blocking and hindering a movement of energy, a sacred movement of energy, and being an obstruction. See, stupid is a blockage. You're purposely hindering the movement of energy, right? So like, whereas with wisdom would say, how can I encourage and cultivate wisdom in others? The Klepoth says, don't encourage wisdom in others. They might find out who you are. You see? Or it's like what Malcolm X said, when he talked about, the reward for history. I'm messing up the quote. I don't want to say it. But he was basically saying that when you study, your scholarship towards history is its own reward, basically. It's similar to when we say in the Kabbalistic terms, time is never wasted with wisdom. But on the Klepoth side, it's never waste time with wisdom. You see? So, I just wanted to share that, you have to get beyond the dualism. And sometimes you may find yourself making these same kind of statements where it's this or it's that, and you're losing the divine direction of what's actually being brought with you. And of course, most people would rather stay in a place of safety where there's an encompassing, because once you get to that third mind and you're functioning with 3 faculties as opposed to 2, there's an awakening that's happening at that point, because you're now, see, that's what mental evolution is. Mental evolution is not just getting smart and having more information. Mental evolution is moving to third mind. And then the evolution beyond third mind is no mind. See, that's when you're truly evolving. Because once you get to no mind, now, like I said, you control thought. When you control thought, you're a dangerous person. You are a dangerous person if you're at the point where you're controlling thought, So it's important to kind of be able to define what some of these definitions or ideas of evolution really mean. you know, and what it really presents to us when we're seeking to achieve a state of ultimate awareness, you see. And like I said in the podcast, the tree is not the fullness of what you are. It's the fullness of what you could be. It's all the things that are present in the world that could end up to you being generous or being merciful or being understanding or being knowledgeable, or, you know, but understanding that the different degrees of different polarities. So ultimately, one is still light and one is still dark. One side of the tree is light and one side of the tree is dark. So you could just stop your mind right there, or you could say, well, within light exists wisdom, exists understanding, exists knowledge, exists mildness. That would be like chesed. You know, exists severity or discipline, geberuth, exists beauty, exists victory, nazak, or exists radiance or glory, hod, exists the foundations, which would be yesod, or exists the kingdom. Now, all of those things exist inside. And then even on that front side, you have different paths to get to each one. We didn't even get into that. We didn't get into the tarot paths. But then you could minimalize darkness and say, oh, darkness is evil. Well, but let's look at the degrees of what darkness, because within those degrees, of course, we have Damiel, right? You know, we have, which is that contention. We have Gogiel. We have, Bina would be Satiriel. You know, Satiriel, you know, we have Belial, which is that opposite of, or that other side of the At. We have, for the other side of like Chesed, then you would have that other energy of Ga'ak Shabla, you know, that dies or tries to smite, you know, tries to hurt as opposed to mildness. Then, you know, you also have on the other dark side, Golahab. You know, so it's like or Tagimran, you know, or Garab, or Samael, or Gomaliel, right, or Lilith, or Nehameth, right. So these are all varying degrees to darkness. You see how much, and each one you could study for 10 years and still not have all of it, right? So there are degrees of light, there are degrees of darkness, and then outside of that, there is a central understanding that orchestrates both of those degrees or both of those polarities, where you can expand and be free of the ego in either one of them. So now your mind is no longer dominated by ego, and every thought that you have doesn't serve as a trigger to your ego to go in a particular direction, but now you're able to see from a multi-dimensional perspective. You're able to see with more periphery, if you will, and your perspective broadens, and you start to learn that things are not so black and white, not so like you're not judging for it's either this or it's either that, you know, and you start to understand that is an underdeveloped way of thinking. That's an underdeveloped mind, because you're not seeing opposites, but you're seeing harmony, or you're seeing disharmony. All right. So, you know, I thought it was apt to speak about the ordering of the mind, because we are surrounded by so many deranged people and so many disordered minds. And sometimes we can't identify it. We have trouble identifying when someone's mind is disordered. And we don't understand really the difference between knowledge and how knowledge can be used in different places, or knowing, right? You know, when we have knowledge, we have a thing that might be static. It might be dead. But when we have knowing, or when we are knowing, we're in movement. Knowing is a process, you know, much different than knowledge, right? So if we're seeking to be knowers, or seeking to be the one knowing, then we're moving through a particular divine direction, and we haven't created hindrances and obstacles to our knowing. But again, if something is said to you and your ego is triggered, we immediately know that you're stuck on one side immediately, right? And it's all kind of little things, you know, like I said, a lot of times when people speak, sometimes they don't really know what they're giving away. They don't know what they're really sharing with us, what they're really sharing with us all. So then when you say certain things, so they're like, you know, I never told you that. You're assuming, or you're getting, no. Sometimes you don't realize how your soul is crying out for help. And you're thinking you're saying things confidently, and all of your demons are inward and invisible. And you might not realize that the agencies of your intelligence and your higher self are cooperating with your mission in order to share the deep range of your own sickness. So it's just important to kind of just take heed to some of those things. Like I said, and I covered some of these things in the podcast and post and stuff like that between Facebook and IG and wherever else. My assistants place stuff, but so I think we do Twitter posts too. I type them up and everything, and then I let them, handle it from there. But in any event, so that's all I wanted to really share. And maybe that will help to inspire some thought in you to have a better look at maybe some of the self-limiting thoughts that you may be operating under now that are not allowing you to equate your principles of perfection along with your principles of transmutation. And, understanding that there is infinite enlightenment, but there's the establishment of transmutation or transformation that, speaks to both sides of the tree, both sides of the person. And when we jump right into wanting to perform magic rites and rituals and stuff like that, sometimes it's because we're stuck on one side if we don't really want to get the full knowledge of what it is that we're doing. And I do understand that some mystics don't teach you, which is something you should be worried about. I can't tell you how many people I talk to get initiated and still don't have a clue as to anything. And it's not just because sometimes your mystics don't teach you, it's because they don't know themselves. That's how they were brought through. So everybody goes through the dark side, stays in the dark side, and has a bunch of useless, dead, secret information that doesn't amount up to anything. So, like I said, willfully, this teaching, it will help to bend you out of some of those patterns and some of those present problems. And you could kind of move into some solutions using living truth. And you can start to become more associated with that and to be the example of a specific force of no mind. All right. So this has been Chief Yuya. And again, thank you for watching, listening, and all that other great and wonderful and beautiful stuff that you all have been doing. And, keep your eyes open. And speaking of triggering, again, I want to give thanks to those who've been sharing the Noir Mail book and the Noir Mail tunes that go along with the book. I've been hearing a lot of I've been sharing this with my father, and I think that's cool. I'm sorry, I got all my alarms going off now. But I just think that's cool, when families can have discussions around things like that, because they're precious topics, you know what I mean? So give thanks for that. I just wanted to express my appreciation before we close out. All right. So Chief Yuya signing out. Everyone be well. Peace.